Imagine waking up one morning to the news that the banks have closed. While your sleep hasn't fully cleared yet, you grab your phone wanting to check your balance, but the app won't open. On the ATM at the end of the street, there is a huge piece of paper, out of service. Stores are open, but no one is accepting cards. Gas stations only want cash. Rent is due, but the landlord isn't accepting transfers. At first, you think this is a minor technical issue, a temporary glitch, perhaps resolved in a few hours. But then you look around. The atmosphere in the street has changed. People have formed long lines in front of bank branches with shutters down. Customers in supermarkets have filled their carts to the brim, paying with crumpled paper bills. Because cards no longer mean anything. An emergency broadcast runs on the television. The financial system is under emergency review. And in that moment you feel a knot in your throat. Your money isn't where you thought it was. It wasn't sitting in your account waiting for you. It was always just numbers on a screen, and the screen is turned off. It might taste like science fiction, but it isn't. It has happened before, and not just in distant troubled countries, but in countries that deemed themselves safe, modern, and stable. And when something like this happens, life does not stop gracefully. It breaks in an instant. Wealth, security, and the rules of survival change overnight. Think of Argentina. 2001. After years of flawed policies, debt burden, and IMF pressure, the government was out of breath. As people started converting their money to dollars and moving it abroad, banks began losing deposits. The government found the remedy in closing the doors. They called this practice corralito. A sweet word, but in reality it was a cage. People were locked inside. Cash withdrawals were limited to 250 pesos a week. Dollar deposits were forcibly converted to pesos. Within a few weeks, the money people had saved for years melted by half. Protests with pots and pans rose in the streets. Families who felt middle class, safe, and orderly were suddenly thrown into chaos. Because when banks close, the lie that money doesn't disappear collapses, it disappears tangibly, when bread, milk, and rent become unaffordable. Argentina was not alone. Cyprus, 2013. The European Union imposed the freezing of deposits as a condition for bailing out the banks. One morning, people learned that accounts over 100,000 euros would be confiscated. Perhaps not a big issue for the wealthiest, but it was a disaster for businesses unable to pay salaries, the elderly unable to access pensions, and families unable to deposit school fees for their children. Lebanon in 2019. After years of corruption and economic collapse, banks eventually lowered the withdrawal limit to a few $100s a month. People, out of anger and desperation, started entering banks with guns. Everywhere, the story was the same. The money you thought was yours actually didn't belong to you. And even in America, where they said it could never happen here, banks closed. In 1933, Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday. All banks remained closed for 4 days. People couldn't withdraw cash, businesses couldn't pay salaries, and the country was literally suspended. Think about it. One of the world's wealthiest nations had to pull the plug on the financial system to prevent a collapse. The truth tying all these examples together is this. Banks do not keep your money in a vault. They operate on a fractional reserve system. Only a small portion of deposits is in the bank. The rest is given out as loans, invested, and put into circulation. The same money is used repeatedly. This system fuels growth, but it is also fragile. If too many people want their money at the same time, The bank does not have enough cash on hand to give. That is why trust is everything. The system works as long as people believe the door is always open. But once that belief is shaken, panic begins. It only takes a few people withdrawing money. A fire in a theater starts with a scream, followed by a stampede. Governments know this. That is why, in crises, their first reflex is to protect the banks, not the citizens. The restrictions in Argentina were not malicious. If people had withdrawn, the banks would have collapsed in a few days. Cyprus's confiscation of deposits was presented as a painful solution, but the public paid the bill. In the U.S., Roosevelt wasn't just trying to soothe the public. He was trying to buy time to stop a chain reaction collapse. The truth is that banks and governments are tightly bound to each other. Banks depend on the government to provide confidence and clean up their mess in crises. Governments need banks to finance them and direct credit. In a moment of crisis, they protect each other. Who is left outside? You, the depositor, the taxpayer, the owner. This illusion is reinforced by rules and insurance systems. The FDIC guarantees deposits up to $250,000 in the U.S. It looks like a nice assurance, but if the entire country demanded its money at the same time, the fund is insufficient. The real power of this insurance is psychological. It exists to keep people calm. So, what happens when banks close? Trade stops. Digital payments collapse. Salaries are delayed. Supply chains freeze. In Lebanon, factories couldn't bring in goods because dollar transfers couldn't be made. In Greece, people waited for hours in front of ATMs in scorching heat just to withdraw 60 euros. Weddings were postponed, surgeries canceled, children taken out of schools. Because the system had started viewing access to money not as a right, but as a privilege to be rationed. Even in today's digital age, the problem has grown larger. As money has become digital, our dependence on banks has increased. If the server crashes, if the POS machine doesn't work, if the bank freezes the account, wealth instantly turns into suspended numbers. In a society where cash is disappearing, a bank shutdown is not an ancient fear. It is a real current danger. Now consider the domino effect. Businesses cannot pay employees, layoffs begin. Suppliers cannot get paid, shelves go empty. Investors panic, assets are sold for pennies, pension funds melt away. The state looks for a solution, but patience has run out. A technical decision made in a boardroom turns into a crisis spreading to every corner of society. And as the duration extends, people become more desperate. Barter, hoarding, even riots. This is not a theory. It has happened. It can happen again. The sentence, "it won't happen to us," was said a few weeks before every collapse in history. The reality is, the purpose of banks is not to protect you. It is to protect themselves and the system. When stress arrives, they sacrifice you. The system is built upon this. Expecting anything different is a mistake. If the bank site doesn't open tomorrow morning, if your card is declined, if your salary isn't deposited, imagine this lasting, not for a day or two, but for weeks. Food, rent, bills. How will your employer pay you with a frozen system? This is the point where fiction becomes reality. Banks are not a neutral vault, but the artery of the economy. When the artery is cut, the whole body dies. The lessons of past crises are not historical knowledge shelved away. They are warnings. In Argentina, the anger wasn't just about money, it was betrayal. In Cyprus, the labor of years for middle-class people was wiped out overnight. In Lebanon, the collapse demolished even the idea of the state. In the U.S., The Great Depression changed the soul of a generation. The common message of them all is this: money is yours only as long as the system allows it. The number in the banking app makes you feel safe until it doesn't. In today's world, record debts, fragile supply chains, political tensions, a bank holiday, or capital control is not an extraordinary idea. It is a viable option. So, what can you do? Answer: no panic, no stuffing money under the mattress. Resilience. Diversification is not a luxury, it is a survival strategy. Having money in multiple forms, in multiple institutions, even in multiple countries, might be the only way to move in a moment of crisis. Real wealth is what you can access during a crisis. Gold, real estate, alternative values, cash reserves, not romantic but practical. And beyond the individual, there is social consciousness. We must understand how the rules are written. Governments have repeatedly passed laws that seem to protect the citizen, but actually protect the system. Deposit insurance, emergency powers, capital controls. These manage panic, not the collapse. If we understand this, we can make a difference. The most terrifying truth is this: the system looks solid until people lose their faith. Once trust slips, it grows fast like a snowball. When a shutdown is declared, the mask falls. Banks are not service providers, they are power structures. You are not a customer, but a cog that functions as long as the system works. History does not repeat itself exactly, but its echoes are strong. Argentina, Cyprus, Lebanon, Greece, the U.S. They all give the same message. Access is not ownership. If your wealth depends on a button, a server, a decision, it is not truly yours. True financial freedom is what remains in your hand when the system shakes. Because one day the question might not be, what if the banks close tomorrow? But, they are closed now, what will I do?